Hello, welcome back to Enigma. In this video, we will demonstrate how to create a stimuli list file for an experiment as an experimenter on Enigma. In this tutorial, you will learn what the information that is required to be included in your stimuli list, as well as some special information you can include for a more complicated experimental design. Enigma accepts a multi-column stimuli list stored as a UTF-8 encoded pure text file. In Windows, for example, we highly recommend you create your list with Excel first for an easier editing process, and simply copy the entire list to Notepad. And every two cells will be automatically separated with a tab key. Then, you can just choose the proper encoding and save it as a text file. Now let's delve deeper into the structure of a stimuli list file. The first row of the list is always processed as column headers, in which only English alphabet can be used. Every single row and the rest of the list represents a trial and its information represented by the column headers. Every stimuli list can have at most 1001 rows, including the header row, and 30 columns. Each data cell should contain at most 100 characters. The cells in each row should be separated with a tab key in the final saved pure text file in order to be parsed correctly in Enigma. Well, if you are a Windows user, you can easily follow the instruction provided earlier in this video to create your pure text stimuli list. In a stimuli list, each column has a unique header, which has a different function in Enigma. This also means that it is almost not possible for you to include random columns in the list. If you include columns that cannot be identified in Enigma, these columns will be excluded from your list automatically. Also, the column names introduced below are all case sensitive. So make sure that you don't have typos in your stimuli list. Let's go through these columns one by one, shall we? The first column you must include in your stimuli list is block. Your stimuli will be grouped automatically according to the labels included in the block column. In addition, you will only see unique blocks generated automatically in the experimental design interface based on the labels in this column. You are only allowed to use combinations of alphabets and numbers in this column. The next one is correct, which is optional in the training session but a must in the test sessions. This is the column for you to specify the correct response key for a specific trial. With correct response keys specified, Enigma will calculate the accuracy rate for each participant in the training or test session. In a training session, correct is meaningful only if you set an accuracy threshold, as we explained in another video. If you don't have an accuracy threshold for your training session, or you only require participants to respond in a random memory recognition test, you don't have to include this column. By contrast, correct must be included in the stimuli list for a test session because ultimately you have to assess learners' performance, and Enigma will also calculate their accuracy rate as a part of the debriefing information. Correct response keys must be chosen from common keyboard keys, including digits 0 to 9 and English alphabet A to Z. A space key is also allowed, and you just need to type space in this column for a trial. If a trial has more than one correct response key, please use commas to separate between two keys in the same cell. In addition to the two crucial columns above, there are a few columns you can freely choose to include or ignore based on your needs. The first is Stimuli ID. You can use this column to number your stimuli and give each of them their unique numeric label in the list. Since Enigma won't label your stimuli automatically, we recommend you to label your stimuli with numerical values to make the analysis of experimental results easier once you have collected all the data you need. You could also include condition in the stimuli list and group your stimuli by experimental condition. When you have this column in your stimuli list with different condition labels, Enigma will help you assign your participants randomly to each condition. When you choose to have this condition column with multiple conditions specified in it, make sure that there is at least one stimulus for each condition in every block to avoid issues with running the experiment. If you have this column in both training and test sessions, then this column should have the same conditions in both sessions. When a participant is assigned to one condition in a training session, the participants will be assigned to the same condition in the test session. Alternatively, you could choose to have conditions specified for a training session but not for a test session. In this case, regardless of which condition participants are assigned to in a training session, they will be tested with the same set of stimuli in a test session. Finally, like we just said, this column is optional, so you don't have to include it at all. Then, all participants will be exposed to the same training stimuli and the same test stimuli. Next, suppose your experiment requires participants to complete multiple sessions and you want to train or test them using different subsets of stimuli for different sessions. Add a session column into your stimuli list. In this column, you have to specify in each cell the session number for each stimulus, and Enigma will automatically select the stimuli subset for your participants depending on their progress. The session number should start with 1, and you cannot skip any session number in this column. If your participants will have to complete 3 sessions, you will need 1, 2, and 3 specified in this session column. The same stimulus can also be used in multiple sessions as long as you specified multiple sessions by separating the numbers with a comma, such as 1, 2. Also be aware that the session number you fill in this column could not be higher than the number you set in number of participation when creating the experiment. If your stimuli are labeled with a nonsensical session number, they will never be selected and presented in your experiment. Last but not least, each block label must include all the session numbers. If the condition column is included in the list, then each experimental condition label must also cover all the session numbers specified in this session column. Moving on, let's talk about perhaps the most important columns in the stimuli list, namely the columns for specifying stimuli per se. If you want to present text strings in your experiment, you need text stimuli columns. If you need to present multiple test stimuli for each trial, you can have multiple text stimuli columns by prefixing the header, such as left text stimuli and right text stimuli. Information specified in these columns will always be processed and presented as pure text in your experiment. This also means that if you put URLs into these columns, Enigma will not access the contents via the links for you. Instead, you will see URLs per se presented on the screen. So if you need to present an image, sound, or video stimulus via URLs, you will need audio URL, video URL, or image URL columns in your list. Just like these text stimuli column, you can also prefix these columns if you need to present multiple multimedia stimuli in one trial. If you choose to include these columns for visual or auditory stimuli, there are some important details about the format of URLs you should be aware of. In each cell, a URL must start with either http:// or https:// and should end with .wav, .mp3, or .ogg in audio URL column, .mp4 in a video URL column for MP4 videos encoded using the H.264 or H.265 format only, or .jpg or .png in an image URL column. Your URLs should also link to target files directly. File sharing links provided by most cloud storage, such as Dropbox, Google Drive, and OneDrive, cannot be processed in Enigma, since these links only serve as a channel to a page where a file is shared rather than directly to a shared file itself. Likewise, a link to a YouTube video won't work in Enigma. Thus, we recommend you to upload your files to a web space, which is very likely to be provided freely by your institution, so Enigma could access the multimedia files via the direct links. Now we'll discuss 3 additional optional columns that can help adjust the presentation of your experimental stimuli dynamically. The first is the length column, which is for specifying different presentation length for each trial in your list. This column must include numeric values between -1 and 3600 in second. Note that -1 for text and image stimuli means the presentation will be infinitely long, unless a response is made. On the other hand, if the stimuli are audios or videos, -1 means the length of the stimuli. Secondly, if you want to delay the presentation of stimuli in each trial by a variable length, you can include the delay column. In this column, you need to enter numbers to specify for how many seconds the stimuli will be delayed. This column must include numeric values between 0 and 3600. The final optional columns you may include are position X and position Y. By including these 2 columns, it is possible to have a variable horizontal or vertical position of a visual stimulus in different trials. This column must include numeric values between -10,000 and 10,000. The number here means the proportion to the stimulus' own width or height. For instance, if a position X cell has a value of -50, then the visual stimulus will be moved from the center of the screen to its left by 50% of its width. If a position Y cell has a value of -50, then the visual stimulus will be moved upward from the screen center by 50% of its height. If both position X and position Y are 0, then a visual stimulus will be aligned to the center of the screen, both horizontally and vertically. Suppose everything is ready, you can just upload the pure text stimuli list to Enigma, and suppose everything goes well, you will see the number of rows and columns as well as all the experimental conditions identified by Enigma. The last information only appears when you include the condition column. Double-check if the information matches your stimuli list. If yes, don't forget to click the Save button at the bottom of the section to truly update your stimuli list. Once the stimuli list is updated successfully, there are some other functions worth noting. First, you will see test stimuli URLs to the right, which is a function that helps check if your URLs can be accessed normally. However, this function is only useful for detecting typos and thus invalid URLs in your stimuli list. Passing the test does not mean these URLs are direct links to your multimedia files. One way to test whether your URLs are direct links by yourself is to copy and paste your URLs to your browser. If the browser shows the file directly without anything else or just asks if you want to download the file, it is very likely that the URLs are direct links. Then, you can use download to examine the stimuli list currently stored in Enigma, or use replace stimuli to upload another stimuli list. Of course, the replace stimuli function won't work after an experiment is activated. Also, whenever you need to check your current stimuli list, just click on Download to retrieve the list. Alright, now that you know how to create and upload your stimuli list, the next step is to learn how to use the information included in the list in your experimental design, which is the goal of our next video. So don't stop here.